Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Magical. Today, we're going to talk about toxicity online. This has been around for a long time, before the internet was even invented, but it has become front page news because it's consistently causing issues. So let's jump in and talk about it. Good morning, Dee. How you doing?
I am doing pretty good. I feel like this is one of the biggest topics that anybody could tackle right now. So I think it'll be interesting for us to get into it.
I mean, let me ask you a question just before we get into all this stuff. I mean, I have statistics and I have data and I have historical stuff I can bring up, but I just want to ask you, like, since you started getting online when you were younger, I mean, you were in high school, right? When you first got
Hmm.
online, quote, like America Online or one of these other like internet service providers.
Yep.
Um, when did you start seeing toxic behavior online?
I mean, it's always been there. It's part of the human condition. But I felt like right around maybe 2010 or so, I want to say things started hitting a new level, and I think part of that is we'll get into why I think that elevated when we get there, but there was definitely a shift at a certain point in time where it went from it being there, but it wasn't super prevalent, to being kind of everywhere, like ubiquitous.
Yeah. Well, this stuff has been around forever. I started experiencing it very early on. I actually started with BBS systems, and I'm not sure if people listening are familiar with it, but these are called bulletin board systems, and we used to use dial-up modems with chat rooms, and basically it would have live chat, and you could play games and all this kind of stuff. And what actually happens is someone would dial your home phone number. It would connect to your modem, and then your machine would automatically click over and bring up this display for them, and it was all like 8-bit kind of like old school gaming display. And then if you had multiple telephone lines in your house, you can have multiple people logging in. I actually really, really enjoyed this, and this was super fun. And in most cases, I had no idea who was logging into these BBS systems. Could be random people, could be people at school that we gave the phone number to. And when they would log in and we would have chats or play games together, inevitably at some point somebody would say some super rude shit and kind of like mess with you or say horrible things. And I remember thinking back then when this occurred that they're probably saying this because it feels fake, meaning like they're not standing in front of me saying like, hey Brian, your clothes look like shit today. It was like easy for them to do because it was digital and they were on their computer, and it's like, oh, then you shut off your computer, you walk away, and it's like it never happened, right? That stuff started for me in the early 90s. But IRC chat channels, which is internet relay chat, that started like
Hmm.
in 1988. And I was reading some messages online recently of people who ran IRC channels back in the day, and they said there was a huge amount of toxicity on IRC channels, and they allowed one-on-one communication, private messaging, data transfer, file sharing. I mean, this is kind of where people would upload like programs and things that they created at home themselves or programmed and would share it with the community. But I mean, a lot of shit talking, D. Even back in the 80s and coming into the early 90s when I first experienced it. And then I really saw it big when America Online came about. And that
Hmm.
was, for those who don't know, was like kind of a gateway to the internet. And they invented kind of this or branded something called instant messaging. And you would go
Hmm.
into these group chat rooms and it felt really virtual and interesting. Um, and you could just chat with all these random people based on topic. And I would go into those rooms and, oh man, did I see some nasty shit. Right. And there was some horrible behavior. I know I've sweared a lot, but toxic behavior brings it out in me. But it was pretty bad back then. And when I
Hmm.
hear now people are like saying like, oh my God, toxicity is so bad. I'm like, well, maybe that's just because there's so many people online, because back then there wasn't as many and I still saw it.
Yeah, I mean, it was always there. It was one of those things where you kind of, if you, if you stayed out of like larger rooms, larger chat rooms on Yahoo Chat or AOL's chat rooms and stuff, then you wouldn't. I mean, you might come across it every now and then, but it wasn't like everywhere. I feel as though in the 2010s, there's a combination of factors that's made things kind of get to a next level.
Okay.
And I think one of the big things is that, like you said, there are a lot more people started getting online. It started spreading to new demographics. You started getting people who were less technical, and to some extent, some of the older people. Some of the most toxic people I see online are older people, people from like a boomer generation who feel like they can and should just say whatever they want because they're somehow better than everyone else.
Yeah.
Not to say that that's everyone within that generation, but I see it happen a lot.
About 6 to 8 years ago, I believe it was now, is quite a while back, and I'm not sure if you recall this or not, is that you and I were doing a research study and we were in people's homes and we were talking to them about their behavior and the things that they do and their lifestyles and all this stuff. And I'm not sure if you remember this, but we met a man who was older and he had a very reputable job prior to retirement. And we asked him, well, what do you do every day? And he said, like, I walk my dog, I do this. He said, and then I come home and I hop online on Facebook and I argue with people about
Hmm.
their dumb political decisions. This is exactly what he said, their dumb political stances for 2 to 3 hours a day. And you said to him, I remember you sitting there, you said to him, you said, wow, like, why do you do that? And he said, it's purely entertainment. I find it to be kind of fun.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. It's to some people, it is a game of like, let's get on there, let's argue with people, and part of it is, there's the arm's length aspect of the internet where you can do things and say things and not get punched in the mouth, as Mike Tyson would say.
Yeah.
Uh, but part of it is also it's these the algorithms are set up. They're not set up to intentionally, or at least at first, I don't know nowadays, but they weren't originally set up to intentionally kind of fan the flames, but they
Mm-mm.
were set up to foster engagement.
Yes.
And one of the ways in which you get a lot of engagement is through kind of the toxic yelling at each other, kind of like making people angry. Kind of that's the whole idea behind trolling. You go in there and you say something that's inflammatory, and everybody feels like they have to or need to or should respond to that. So that played right into it. Like you would go into like the Facebook comment stream, and the comments that get showcased and put up front are not the ones who have the most likes. They're the ones that have the most replies.
So it's like a system that feeds on itself.
Yeah, and at some point, like you see this on Twitter, you started seeing kind of like the internet personalities who realized if I just post inflammatory stuff that are going to get people angry, I feel like this is like the kind of the Milo Yiannopoulos or the Ben Shapiro playbook a little bit. Is just say things that are inflammatory, shock jockey, the Alex Jones types, and it you can almost describe it as performance art. Maybe they don't believe the things that they're saying, but it gets a reaction, it gets attention, it gets sometimes on the news. Oh, look at this crazy thing that so and so said, and people have built kind of careers around it.
Yeah. I mean, is this kind of a little bit like before the internet, we had like Star Magazine and you'd see it at the grocery store?
Tabloids,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right. And it would say
yeah,
like alien found at like Lake Powell. And then they would like put someone in makeup and show them like standing in the water in Lake Powell and just blatantly say that they found an alien and stuff. And it's like, how did you get away with that stuff?
yeah. I think so. And to some extent, there are people who are kind of tongue in cheek about it. Like for the longest time on Reddit, the subreddit r/conspiracy theory was like a place for people to go and kind of mess around and have fun and be kind of jokey. And then when Q started taking off, then it the character of the subreddit changed. At least that's what I'm told. I didn't really
Yeah.
hang out there, but it started being people who took it really seriously and like the government is lying to you and all these other kinds of crazy things. Not that I think the government is being the most truthful in the world, but like making that kind of your clarion call is sending a very clear message.
Yeah. And all this stuff that we're talking about, whether it be like conspiracy theories, bullying, hate speech, all this kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just that you're throwing it out into the universe and people see it and go like whatever, right? It's actually very harmful to individuals. And I think that for a long time we kind of looked at it as like, well, if you don't like it, just don't look at it. But the problem is that I've done research on this and basically it's shown that bullying, whether it be online or in person, that kind of stuff, associated with a range of mental and physical consequences, including anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts. I mean, there have been long-term studies that are done that show that bullying even continues on. Like the feelings you have, the effects of it, those types of things that are done online to you can continue with you as you get older, lowering confidence, giving you, mental issues, affecting economics, like, whether or not you want to go for a job because you maybe have a more aggressive boss, and it starts to kind of like bring up some of the feelings that you had when you were bullied online. Like there's a lot to it, and they're just at the tip of the iceberg of really understanding what it means to like truly have that much garbage thrown at you, especially at a younger age. Like, and what that
Yeah.
actually means when you get older. And I know that all of these platforms are trying to find ways to manage it or control it and that kind of stuff. But the hard part is that, like you said, you get more engagement when people are arguing with each other, right? And engagement is what gives you advertising and other things like that, right? And so
Hmm.
it's kind of this nasty cycle. But I wanted to tell you about this 2021 Pew Research report because I thought it was really interesting. It basically said that 41% of Americans 41% have personally experienced some form of online harassment. That's a lot. It's almost half of the people.
That
Um,
honestly, it sounds low to me.
it sounds low. Wow. Okay. So while this is similar percentage to when they ran this in 2017, there's evidence that online harassment has intensified, meaning that you're
Hmm.
still being harassed, but it's intensified in a different way, by more than 25%, and kind of tapping into physical threats, stalking. I think you talked about one where you like send like swatting, right? Sexual harassment,
Yeah.
all this type of stuff. And it's getting worse based on self-report, like people saying like,
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like it's nasty online. Do you feel like it's worse now for you personally than it was prior to this many people engaging in social applications?
I mean, not for me personally because I've disengaged. Like I'm just like I've just become like a constant lurker. I don't post anything. I don't have presence. Looking at this data, like if it's saying that 41% of Americans, not
Uh-huh.
Americans on who are active online, then that makes a lot more sense to me because
Yeah.
it's for you to ever to be active online, to be active on socials, and to have never received like a harassing statement. It seems like a unicorn kind of thing. That's like some kind of magic bullet thing going on.
Yeah.
Um, so it's the only way to not experience this stuff for the most part is to actively avoid it. Like you can't avoid it passively. You can't post something like as mundane it might be. It's like, oh, I like kittens. Somebody's going to yell at you. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. It's kind of the law of large numbers. Like if you only have a small percentage of the population that is being toxic, but they're constantly online and being toxic to other people, then everyone's going to experience that because it only takes a small amount. It's like a bad apple spoils the bunch. It only takes one, and it
Now,
spoils everything
I
because it just
believe
spreads.
you were the one that was telling me a while back that they found that roughly 2 to 3% of all toxic behavior. Wait, how does it? Um, on Twitter, the toxic behavior is represented by about 2 to 3%, but pretty much transcends to almost everybody.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact numbers, but yeah, it was a small number, and there was a time when people commented. I saw tons of comments, and this isn't scientific; it's just some anecdotal responses that when a they did a large scale purge of either very toxic people or a collection of bots, because there are bots that are set up to just go out there and harass people. They're
Ugh.
not even people; it's just bots who are programmed to insult people online. Um, that a lot of people felt like after those purges, the toxicity dropped, but it seems to just come back because there's whatever you do, there tends to be a workaround if somebody really wants to uh, be toxic on your platform.
Yeah. I mean, do you feel like it's gotten worse in certain areas? Like, for example, social versus gaming versus like general comments on, I don't know, news reports and videos, right? Like, because I see it, I find that in gaming, it can get nasty when people get ramped up. And then
Hmm.
in videos, when controversial stuff is said, then you see it in the comments really, really badly. But with like Twitter and that kind of stuff, it's like inevitable. No matter what you post, someone's going to say something mean to you.
Yeah, I think that I would say yes and no. So I feel like the wide open platforms like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, um, those have gotten worse. And I think that part of that is, as I said before, I think it's a different demographic of people online. I think when we first started, like, MySpace and Facebook and stuff like that, a lot of the people who were online were people who were a little bit more, they were a little bit more technologically advanced. This was something that was new. They were trying something out. They came with more of a positive attitude.
Yeah.
And now it's everybody. So that means that a lot of the goodwill sentiment that were there with the early adopters is faded into the minority a bit. Um, the other thing is you have to recognize that toxicity in gaming, especially around certain games like Battlefield or Call of Duty, has always been terrible. It's always been
Yeah.
bad. You can go back and watch, like, I think it was 40-Year-Old Virgin or something like that, and they were like yelling at children online
Yeah. Yeah.
while they were playing games, because that was kind of part of the experience, and it was, highly toxic. But it is, I think, like, politics absolutely have gotten really bad. Some of the things where you would expect it not to be too bad, like fashion and stuff, has gotten pretty bad. Like, they're just bagging on each other's clothing and stuff sometimes. Like, there are plenty of areas where it didn't used to be, like art and music, have gotten pretty toxic at times.
So, what about that application that you used to be on? It was really fun. It was the one where we would go into rooms and then people would play music and you get to be a DJ and that kind of stuff. What was that one called?
Yeah, turntable.
Turntable. So, did you have any issues on Turntable? Because I don't remember you ever complaining about it. And there was a lot of people in your rooms when you were DJing.
No, but that's because I was a mod and I was pretty quick with the boot. And my perspective on that was, all right, we have plenty of people. I'm not trying to really, I'm trying to build a good, supportive, positive community, not just get everybody in the world into there. And with that in mind, there's plenty of fish in the sea. And if somebody's going to come in and they're going to be immediately toxic, I just don't want them. I'm not going to try to change their behavior. That seems kind of pointless to me, especially for someone who comes from a psychology background and knows that these behaviors are deeply ingrained and takes a lot of work in order to change them. So I'm just like, all right, go ahead, goodbye. I think one of the differences between what you see in some communities, like I think Discord and Reddit and something like Turntable, where you end up having multiple smaller communities, is much easier to manage when you have something like Twitter, where it's just wide open and everybody sees everything. And we know this from team dynamics research in psychology, where if you get beyond, for example, 6 people, then it becomes nearly impossible to reach a consensus. So that's why you can't really do community policing on something like a Twitter, because you can't have a consensus among whoever the moderators are.
I actually have some stuff about this, but I want to talk a little bit about gaming first because you had mentioned gaming, and it's all over the news about all of these issues that people are having in gaming. I have had conversations with parents at my son's school, and they were asking like, "Hey, like, what games do you?" They literally would say like, "What games do you let your son play?" Because I don't want him to. He's 7 years old. I don't want him to be like harassed online and those different types of things. So these conversations are quite active. So I dug into some data, and I just wanted to bring this up because I think it's helpful. Is the Anti Defamation League, ADL? So in 2021, they conducted their third annual survey on the experience people have with online games to learn more about what's positive and what's concerning about gaming. Okay, the survey explored social interactions, experiences, attitudes, and behaviors of online multiplayer games nationwide. And I know you play multiplayer games, so I thought you'd find this interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The survey asked about experience of a nationally represented sample of nearly 100 million adult online multiplayer gamers in the US. And for the first time ever, the survey also included young gamers that are between 13 and 17. So most young gamers, more than 9 out of 10 of them, reported positive social experiences in online multiplayer games, which
Mm-hmm.
included making friends, learning about interesting topics, gaining a sense of belonging, all that kind of stuff. But the report also revealed that while the majority of gamers reported the positive social interactions and connections that gaming brought, a high percentage of them face regular and ongoing hate and harassment while playing. 5 out of 6 adults, roughly 83% between 18 and 45, experience harassment in the games, and 3 out of 5 young people, around 60%, said they experienced harassment. Do you personally experience online harassment when playing multiplayer games?
No. But again, I'm a lurker. I don't use any of the chat things. I mean, I have before. And to be honest, I don't play PvP games anymore.
Okay.
And
You
it's
pulled
not
away
because
from
of
that? I thought you did. I thought you did. No?
I did for a while, and I burned out on it. And one of the reasons why I don't play PvP is not because of harassment or toxicity. It's just the cheating. Like there's so much cheating, there's so much competition, so you will get aim bots and all these other kinds of things, and it's just like
Yeah.
wall hacks, and it's not fun anymore. I don't want to feel like I need to cheat in order to play on a level where I can feel competitive.
Yeah.
So it's like I went back. I spent a long time. At one point, I wanted to make it my goal. I wanted to be good at Call of Duty because I feel
Yeah.
like Call of Duty multiplayer was extremely challenging, and it took a lot of not just the fine motor skills development, but just strategic understanding of like what are the map layouts, where are the spawns going to be, how can I predict where someone's going to be before they're there, how can I learn things like centering so that like or just keeping my weapon pointed at where the cover was going to be if somebody's going to show up there. And it was a good learning experience. But at a certain point, I was like, all right, I've done this now, and now everybody's hacking and cheating and all these kinds of things. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And
Hmm.
then get back to more story driven first person experiences like The Last of Us or Uncharted or some of those types of games. So I've kind of gone the other direction more recently, but it's definitely out there. One of the things that I think that we have to understand as people who are a little bit older is that the experience of bullying, I think, for a lot of younger people online is different than what we experience with it.
Okay.
I feel like a lot of the younger generation have a thicker skin on it because when I hear them talk about it, they are a little, will tend to be, not always, but will tend to be somewhat more dismissive. Like, yeah, it's just kind of what happens. I don't think that they necessarily kind of internalize it in the same way that someone like us internalized it, where we're relating it to like real world harassment and bullying or arguing and things like
Hmm.
that. I think it seems as though, based on my conversations with people in this age group, they're kind of like shunting it off into a different category. That's not real bullying. That's cyberbullying. Which maybe not real bullying is not the word. It's not real world bullying,
In real
except in
life.
extreme cases where you're actually getting doxed or swatted or something like that. That's extreme. But somebody calling you a name while you're playing Splatoon or something online is not seems to not bother them a great deal.
Yeah.
It is a little bit more of like the super targeted stuff of like somebody actually stalking somebody from like chat room to chat room to try to like mess with them specifically. But the more garden variety of stuff, they seem to just not relate it to their, experiences of being threatened in real life or feeling threatened in real life and kind of seems to not affect them quite as much.
Yeah, I've actually heard that as well. But then I have met some younger people that said that even though it kind of doesn't affect them in the sense that they blow it off, they say they still kind of marinate on it for a long time when someone says something really hateful. Um, and I don't know what that kind of transcends into, later in life.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of an interesting understanding of how we deal with this stuff. I mean, they're growing
Yeah.
up with it, right? So you and I didn't grow up with it. We actually came into it, which is such a different experience. I mean, when I had a bully kind of give me crap or whatever when I was younger, it was in person. And you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it was like way more scary because it was like, oh, this is like a real person in front of me, right? So when I came into using computers and games and things like that, and people would say stuff, I'm like, whatever, I just turn off my computer and walk away. But not everybody
Mhm.
has the same mindset, and that's why this is kind of a problem. And I also have this theory too. And you played football, so I think you would understand this better than I mean, you and I did martial arts forever, right? But like, you also played football. When you are in like a really high intense game, I don't care if it's intellectual, like Call of Duty, or if it's physical, like on the field. Sometimes like people get ramped up and then they just start like dumping stuff out of their mouth, right? And when you're on the field or we're doing, I've done competition of martial arts and stuff, like, and people get like that, you're just like, whatever, that dude needs to chill out, right? Like in your mind, that's what you're thinking. Do you feel like that type of stuff that we would see every once in a while on the field or in the martial arts studio or whatever it is that basically the same thing that we're just seeing when they're playing Call of Duty and they're just getting all riled up and frustrated?
Every now and then, it's kind of interesting. You'll see some of those viral videos of people out there, like, they get headshotted and they like lose their mind and start screaming and breaking their computer and stuff like that. And
Exactly.
that's kind of entertaining. But I don't think so, honestly. I think it's a little bit more of like people trying to be trolls, people doing it intentionally, people thinking that it's entertaining. There are instances in which you're like super riled up while you're playing like an online multiplayer game, but I don't I don't really feel like it that much. I mean, it's not it's you're not sometimes for sure, but the rank and file who are playing a game are not, having that kind of physiological response like they do when you're playing a football game and somebody takes a cheap shot at you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean,
And
I
the
get that.
consequences are very different too. Like, if somebody takes a cheap shot, you're going to put the torn, like in a football game or a soccer game or something like that. You can end up with a torn ACL, a concussion, those kinds of things. You're not going to get that when you're playing Call of Duty.
Yeah, no, it's very true, and I ask these questions because being someone who has a background in psychology and kind of, has spent so much time thinking about people's behavior, it's a interesting intellectual kind of experiment, or what do you want to call it, like exercise, to try to figure out why they're doing what they're doing. And so I started doing some research, and I went to stopbullying.gov, which is a great resource for anyone who wants to kind of understand about online bullying and the psychology behind it and stuff. And they basically describe two kinds of people that are likely to bully: those who are popular and those who are on the social fringes. And so, like, popular kids or teens may bully because they see it as a way of staying popular or hurting others to make them feel powerful. And kids who are more on the fringe or less social, helps them cope with low self esteem. It may make them feel like they fit in with their peers, and trouble, basically emphasizing with those that they've hurt. Like, they don't really understand that they're hurting people by doing it online. What's actually interesting about this information is something that popped in my mind was like in high school, how groups did not interact as much. So you would have like, groups that were like super into computers and gaming. Wow, we were not hanging out with the football players, dude. Right. So now we're basically mixing the type of person who wants to be like a football player or super popular with the people who are maybe not as popular but very intellectual, and everybody's in the same arena now, and these people are kind of interacting with each other. So I'm kind of
Yeah.
wondering if there's like some sort of like natural like disconnect between how they communicate with each other that causes this stuff to escalate.
Well, I do think there is something to be said for kind of the wide open space that something like Twitter is or Instagram, like relative to kind of even what we had before with IOCs or BBSs or chat rooms where you would get, you know, maybe some of the most popular chat rooms might have like 100 people in it, right? Now we're talking about a million people, millions of people on the same platform, all kind of in the same sandbox. So there's
Yep.
just, it's infinitely harder to moderate. It's the spread of one person being toxic just gets completely magnified. I think that the size of the community, it just makes the problems much harder to deal with.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. I mean, like, I have statistics coming out of my head here, but I don't think we need to get into this as much because I feel like everybody understands that this exists and this is a prevalent issue and a problem. But let's talk about how we actually solve this problem. And we'll go down this list. There's basically three ways in which the community, the tech companies, psychologists, other people have been thinking about how to deal with this issue online. And I want to talk to you about each one because you and I have worked in each of these issues. I mean, we worked in each of these areas where we've actually done research in these areas and helped support um, companies trying to solve these problems. So the first one is community based. So this is the idea that the community can police itself. So I think one of the best companies that does this online is probably Reddit. Um, they still have their problems, but like the community can come in and basically get rid of you. How do you feel about community based policing in that sense?
Well, I think it's essential. I think you can't just do this through kind of a spam filters and things like that. I think you have to have community engagement. I think you have to have people within the community who are making choices about how that community is run. At the same time, you see this on Reddit where a lot of times the toxicity that still occurs in a to a great amount on Reddit is because you have communities themselves are toxic. So like the entire subreddit is toxic. It's not like there's a vein of toxicity through it.
Yeah.
And that comes down to just having toxic mods and people running that community. So what we've seen, it's sometimes I think it's taken a little bit too long, but those communities end up getting banned a lot of times, which is what should happen.
Yeah, but when you ban a community like that, you're banning everybody. You know what I mean? And it's like even
Not
if
necessarily. So the way that these a lot of times work is they break it up. So it's not like they're banning every single user. There are probably some users that do get banned,
uh
but it's like, all right, well, nothing to see here. Break it up. Everybody go home, and they retreat to their corners. And then when they get into other communities that are not run the same way, they're forced to conform more to those rules.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing about community based that has always perplexed me. So there's this old idea that like when you're building a company, for example, is that the behavior of the company, the individuals, the people get hired, everything that happens is basically a top down thing. So if you have two really competent founders that are kind and respectful and hardworking and all that kind of stuff, those behaviors of those individuals tend to transcend down to the rest of the people who are employed at that company to help make that company a success.
Hmm.
When I think about these communities, some of these communities police, maybe I shouldn't use the word police, moderate, I don't know, really well. Okay. And so if I take something like Reddit, which it's a tough community and the moderation that happens on there is pretty good. But if you go over to LinkedIn, for example, we have framed up LinkedIn as basically a place for employ jobs and employment and careers and all this stuff. The second somebody drops something inappropriate or anything on there, at least on the feed that I follow, I mean,
Hmm.
immediately people respond with, "Hey, I understand that this was important to you. This is not the right place for this. This is for employment. This is for careers. Can you please remove this? This is not the right place for this." I mean, they
Hmm.
jump on them so fast, and I rarely ever see any issues on LinkedIn at all. I mean, barely, right? So,
Yeah.
how could one community manage it so well? And then you look at the opposite, which is like Twitter is a freaking dumpster fire, right? It's like, what is actually going on that we can maybe take some of the learnings from LinkedIn and get those over to the Twitter side, which honestly is terrible. And everybody knows this.
I I don't think you can. It's just it's a completely different animal. Like you look at LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is first. There's no expectation of anonymity. You're using your real name. You're posting things about your workplace. Like it can get back to you and affect your real life very much so.
Mhm.
There's also it's a place for professionals. You're not going to see a lot of children on there. You're not going to see a lot of 18-year-olds. You're mostly going to see people who are out of college or working age and to a certain extent, you're not going to see a lot of people who are outside of kind of professional fields, right? You're not going to see people who are in kind of lower paying jobs there, to be honest, not to put a too fine a point on it. But there are all those consequences around it. I don't think it attracts the type of people in the way it's done. And I think there's not a lot of pushback on if somebody is going to make some kind of controversial statement and get censored. The whole platform is set up for this is about career and this is about professionalism. So if that is kind of, as you said before, there's a culture behind it, and the
Mhm.
culture flows downwards from the top. But the culture is like, all right, this is professionalism. This is what it's for. If you want to post inflammatory stuff, go over to Twitter. And that's why I don't think that they've had to do too much to manage it. And I also don't think they end up in this situation where they think to themselves like, oh well, I have to hand wring and like, is it right to remove this or not? Which I've never really believed in. When Jack Dorsey and some of these people will say like, oh well, we believe in free speech. I'm like, this is not a free speech issue. This is you deciding what experiences represent your brand.
Hmm.
You're not saying that somebody can't do it. You're not putting them in jail. You're not finding them money. They just can't do it on your property, and that's what Twitter is. It is your property. It is the equivalent of somebody posting a sign on your front lawn. So, what signs do you want on your front lawn? What do you want representing you and your company? Because that is the experience that is currently on Twitter, and it's also the experience that's currently on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn set things up from the very beginning to set expectations that this is something that's professional. This is not a place where you go and say whatever you want. This is not a place where you go to be anonymous. This is a place where you go where you represent yourself and you connect with people for professional purposes.
Well, you just nailed something right there. You said anonymous. So what if we took something like Twitter or Reddit and just said, you have to verify that you are who you are, and everyone will know your name and who you are? Does that solve the problem? Because this has been an argument for a long time. Is like they're like the reason why people are so good on LinkedIn is because
Yeah,
everyone knows who you are. It's connected to your livelihood, your job, right? You're not
yeah.
going to go out on a limb to say horrible things because you have to keep your job or whatever. Like there's something tied to it, right?
No, I don't. I don't think that. I don't think verifying people. I mean, it'll just kill the platform. Because the difference between LinkedIn, the biggest difference between LinkedIn and Twitter is that on LinkedIn there is not an expectation. There's
Uh-huh.
that psychological expectation of anonymity. On Twitter, there is not. If you wanted to go and be anonymous on LinkedIn, you absolutely could, but there's not an expectation of doing so, so you don't. You could set up a fake account. You can do all these things. They're not verifying you. They're not checking your driver's license or your social security number. You can absolutely go in there and say, "Hey, I'm so and so, and I'm gonna be a troll and do all these things." But you don't, because that's just not the expectation for it. If you set it up on Twitter where you weren't anonymous and you were using your real name but you weren't
Mhm.
verified, then people just set up fake names and fake accounts and those kinds of things. I see it all the time with Facebook, even though you're supposed to use your real name.
Mhm.
Um, and I joke with people because they'll they will not use their real name on Facebook, and I'll be like, I don't know who's posting this. I can't
Yeah.
remember who your fake name is and your real name, so I'm not going to bother.
Yeah.
Um, and if you actually make them verify, I'm not providing my personal information to Twitter. I don't trust them. I'm not going to provide them my driver's license and my address and things like that.
Mhm.
So the platform would just die, which maybe it should, to be honest. Like maybe
Well,
it should be rebirthed into something else.
Well, based on your argument, though, it kind of sounds like you don't necessarily believe that there should be some sort of platform where anyone can just do anything that they want, say whatever they want around the world. Because like there's also the other argument, which is like that whole free speech one, which is like, well, Twitter should be the place where anyone can say whatever they want. It's all fair game, and you should just deal with it. And it's like,
Why? I don't
why?
understand that argument.
I don't
Like,
I don't
why should
understand
somebody
it
be able to
either.
say and do whatever they want? There's nowhere else in the world you can just do whatever you want. If you're making a considered argument and like an actual, like, all right, this is my position from a political standpoint because I believe that's important, then sure, there should be a place for that. If you're just going to go out there and say racist things and hate speech and or just try to troll people, like, no, why should that be allowed anywhere?
Yeah, I agree. So let's talk about the second one, which is automation. So it's the idea that an AI system or some automated system will go through and it'll just wipe out things that people say that are inappropriate or harmful or hateful, and the system itself just automatically purges that content. Um, I know this is where a lot of companies are going. They're moving into this because it could be really effective if done correctly. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, though, you have to be careful, right? Because there's two parts to this. One is you can erode the user experience for sure. Because if it's not done correctly and it's like cutting out sentences and different things like that, it starts to become like weird and choppy, and you're like, what is happening here, right? So that part has to be worked out. But that's a technical side of things, right? And then
Uh-huh.
the other side of it is like, well, there's a gray area on what people say. So in many cases, someone will, let's say, make a joke, and that joke, people understand that joke, but the system itself doesn't see it as a joke, let's say, and so it automatically deletes it, right? There's always gray areas with communication. So a system that can learn that stuff needs to be extremely complex. And I don't think we're there yet. I don't think the technology is there yet.
Well, I don't. I'm not convinced that it should be that sophisticated. I don't. I'm not sure that it should ever get to that point. It could, like, you can have the semantic processing in place in order to do that. This is one of the reasons why I think community based moderation is so important, because they can take into account the context and the situation. Like, we were doing some work around this, and the question came up: should we just remove racial slurs automatically? And then it came up: what if it's a forum that's discussing, hip hop lyrics, where the context in which those words are going out might not be the same.
Yeah.
It requires a little bit, and requires a little bit more nuance, and it might be something where the community should kind of moderate itself, and maybe for something like that where it has a nuanced thing, the platform on a human level should kind of be in communication with with those mods in order to kind of understand the complexities of that particular community.
Yeah.
But I think that there is a place for automation. I think the place for automation is things where people are posting scam links, or like, click on this and installs a virus, or people are just spamming, like, it's like 300 exclamation points and 300 messages in 30 seconds. Things like that can get automatically removed. I think when you get to the point where you're getting into the nuance of, like, is this harassment, or is somebody, like, is this satire? Is this, my brother and I will talk trash to each other all the time. Doesn't mean that it's bullying or hate speech. It's,
Exactly.
we're brothers. We kind of, like, throw out creative insults as like a game. So that's something that, like, there's some nuance to a lot of that level of communication that's not necessarily hateful, but it can be it can be seen as that without the appropriate context. And I think
Yeah.
that automation, we're a long way away from even an outsider human taking a look at that and understanding the nuance that's going on, much less automation.
100%. And I feel like if we're going to apply automation, it has to be within a framework that makes sense within the community, right? So
Mm-hmm.
just like you said with with the hip hop example, right? It's like the framework for that automation would be different than if we were applying it to a group of retired people who talk about crocheting, right? Like
Yeah.
it's going to be different, and I don't think the technology is fully there yet, but they're getting closer, and they're getting better at it. And I see it as an effective tool, but I don't see it as the only tool. I see it as like combining the community
Yeah.
base and the automation together could have a big effect, right?
Well, I think there's also, like, an important psychological component to having that human moderation, is that, if you're a member of that community, and this doesn't work on Twitter because you don't feel like you're a member of community, right? It's just this wide open space that everybody shouts into. The But if you're in a part of a community, and the mod or the host or the owner of that community, that subreddit, for example, comes to you and says, hey, you can't do this or that, there's this feeling of you've let down another human being. Not to mention the fact there's a feeling of ownership for those mods, and commitment that's involved, that doesn't happen on Twitter, right? There's not like, I'm making a place that feels like home to me feel like unwelcoming or something like that. I mean, it just goes out into the ether, and kind of most of the time will just kind of disappear into the nothingness, right? That's kind
Exactly.
of what Twitter kind of is. But if you're on, like, a chat room with, 15, 20 people that you interact with regularly, or if you're in a subreddit and you're starting to get to know people, then there's a little bit more of a human connection, and there's a sense of community going on, and a sense of ownership, and then you don't people are less likely to want to poison that well.
Exactly. No, I mean, I think that's totally spot on. All right. So, and then the last one, D, is manual. And this idea of having teams of employees. I mean, lots of them, working together to basically go through everything and figure out what is appropriate, what's not appropriate, and then, delete or remove that person or whatever it is, but it's all done manually. They're like farms of people basically digging through
Yeah.
the content. And they used to do this actually when the internet first started up. There was a couple websites where I had visited the companies themselves, and they had like farms of people sitting there, and I was like, what are they doing? They're like, oh, they're manually checking links, or they're manually doing this. I mean, this is a way to kind of get things off the ground before you can actually get your automation functioning.
Mhm.
What do you think about this approach? I mean, my only concern is that it's very. I mean, you could give them a set of rules, but it's still what do you call it? Subjective to some extent, right?
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, the whole thing is subjective. And it's one of the challenges with automation is you're trying to take something that's subjective and make it objective. But like bullying in itself, and by its very nature, is subjective, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of has the subjective aspect of what you're taking away from it. So I think this is important for a few reasons. One is that it gets members of that company, that corporation, directly involved with the experience, and for them to have a sense of direct involvement, of just another level of kind of commitment and like a feeling of this is my problem too. Because as much as we try to avoid this, at some level it becomes a kind of unspoken level sense of like that's not really my problem. It's kind of my problem because I need to solve it, and that's part of my job. But the a lot of times the executives or even a lower level than that, even the middle management, they're aware that the harassment and things are going on, but they're not necessarily experiencing it directly. So it's not a personal problem for them, so it becomes less on a certain level. Like it's still part of their job to do it, but it's not a personal crusade for them. It's not a personal goal. It's a professional goal.
Yeah.
So having some people involved in some level just gives the company itself another layer of skin in the game. It also helps them to understand the dynamics of the community. It also helps the community feel as though we're all in it together. There's a lot of reasons why there's some level of their involvement in moderating the platform is valuable.
Hmm.
Now, you've mentioned there's absolutely some logistics concerns. If you're talking about a platform the size of Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, it just can't be done. You don't have enough people in the world to do that, right? There's so much content going through it that you can't sift through every single one. But I have seen it done before on certain platforms. Would have what sometimes called is called like a super mod,
Okay.
and that's where you have something like on Reddit where like the entire platform, the entire subreddit gets banned.
Hmm.
It's because it gets to the attention of one of these super mods. Some of the a representative of the company takes a look at it and says like this whole thing is rotten and it needs to be rooted out. And then most of the people can stick around and they can go to other communities and maybe not be so toxic. But like this gathering place has just become a megaphone. It's accelerating everything. It's making things worse. So we're going to break it up so that the subreddit itself might get banned, or the chat room or whatever it happens to be. And that's something you can't really do on Twitter because everything's so wide open. But it is a lot of times worked in combination with automation or community based moderation, where a mod can reach out to a super mod and get their attention, or the automation can do that and notice like, hey, there's a lot of redactions going on within this community, and why don't you go take a look and see what's going on? Or if somebody feels like they were booted or banned for an unfair reason, they can appeal to the supermod and they can get involved.
Uh huh.
But it's one of those things where you have like a variety of different approaches coming together, then you can see it's kind of working together and enhancing each other.
So basically, kind of like breakdown of these three tells me that it's probably some really fine tuned combination of the three, of like having the community based going on, having some automation going in and, removing and kind of educating users on what they can say and what they can't say, and then manual teams kind of going through and doing this. It's complicated, and it seems, I almost go back to a point of like, what's the point anymore? Maybe we just get rid of it, get
Well,
rid of Twitter. It's like,
I think Twitter. I think Twitter's a lost cause. I think it needs to be rebooted into something new with different expectations and start fresh. I mean, it's kind of like we say this for social all the time, right? Socials like the. It's less like the bar that's been around for 100 years. It's more like the nightclubs that's open for 6 months and then it shuts down and reboots under the same ownership and same management with a different theme, and just gets attention. I think
yeah.
that's an element of it. There's another element to kind of solving this problem that we haven't really touched upon, and that is things that incentivize positive behavior.
Okay.
And I've seen this before on forums. It exists on Reddit. It probably exists on some other platforms too. It doesn't really exist on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, and I think it's a bit of an oversight. And that's kind of this reputational system. Like it's kind of like karma, where they'll call it karma sometimes, where you'll see, what somebody's overall karma is. That's how many times when they posted something, they've gotten kind of a thumbs up or a like or an upvote versus a downvote. And if somebody has really bad karma, then they might get less of the benefit of the doubt when it comes to kind of the community-based reactions, when it comes to how automation treats it. And a lot of times when somebody comes in, and I used to be on one where you would get different titles as you leveled up. Like if you got a certain level, you would be like a guru or a sage or something like that, because you were contributing to the knowledge base of that particular forum. And that one was very knowledge based. So it became like when you saw somebody who had that title and it meant you might have color coded, you might have a badge or something like that. When you came into a new conversation, people would respond to you in that way. It was just like, oh, okay, well, this person has a certain level of reputation, so we're gonna process what they have to say in a different context than somebody whose name is not that great. So that I think is absolutely an element of solving the toxicity, is just like pointing out and shining a light on the people who bring positive experiences, who are authentic and have that kind of good behavior.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way of doing it. I mean, that's how you kind of incentivize kids, in school and
Yeah.
stuff. Positive behavior leads to good outcomes, and you know, and it tends to work at a younger age. And I do wonder if the incentives are good enough, right? That when kids get older and adults and stuff like that can be incentivized to do that. I feel like there's always going to be that subset, you and I've talked about it, of people who just want to
Mhm.
bully, right? And they just want to do that.
Yeah.
And hopefully that's where the automation kicks in, or that's where the manual teams of people working together to kind of curb that stuff kicks in. But, I think it's possible to keep it quite civil with all of these approaches. It's just exhausting. I mean, you look at it and you go, this isn't a really, really interesting problem to work on. You and I work on this problem actually, and we really enjoy the challenge of it. But there are parts of my brain that always goes like, man, some of these platforms I feel like have real promise. And some of them, like we've talked about with Twitter, I was like, I don't even know. I don't even know if it's ever going to get there, because it's gone down this path for so long, and they've tried a lot of things. Maybe they need a completely new approach, or they need to kind of rethink the way the company functions.
Well, it's become that user experience has become part of the brand now for Twitter. Like, if you were to imagine in your head a non-toxic Twitter where you go and you say whatever you want and people don't yell at you for anything, is that even Twitter
Yeah,
anymore?
yeah,
Right? That's something else entirely to me. So to be fair, for a lot of these social platforms, there's so much that they're trying to accomplish at the same time. Right? They're trying to grow a user base. They're trying to get engagement. Once it takes off, there's so many technical challenges of hosting and managing, just moving that content. Like at some point, I talked to a back end engineer on at Twitter and Instagram, and just the technical challenge of hosting all of that content is a real significant challenge. There's a lot of things that
sure,
people put their time and energy into. And what I would say if somebody's starting up a social platform today is to start building these into your platform immediately. And
hmm
you'll continue to refine it. But a lot of times, if you're a startup and you're running on investor money, you're just trying to get the platform up and running. You're not necessarily thinking about what the problems are going to be 10 years from when you start.
Oh,
But I think it
totally. I
is essential.
empathize with that. I
Yeah.
understand that. Yeah. And I also wonder too if the incentives are different. So, for example, I think about like a game that people love. And if you're told, hey, if you continue with this behavior, you no longer get to play this game, feels like a
Mhm.
bigger driver to wanting to clean up your behavior than if you're just on some, social platform that's just wide and open, you know,
Mhm.
and you're just on there just like reading comments and commenting, right? Maybe that's not true. Maybe people have just as much emotional tie to that as they do to playing a game. But like I've definitely seen in gaming where people are like, I've heard people say like, oh man, like I got a warning or something, right? And they're like, I don't want to get any more because I love this platform. I love this game so much. I don't want to get kicked out,
Yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
what is the
I think that
incentive that really gets people to want to stay engaged?
Well, we know just from psychology that Skinner used to write about this, where if you only apply punishment, it's not really going to work. People, when you extinguish one behavior, another one has to emerge, and it's unpredictable what that's going to be. So, if you were to punish
Yep.
one set of behavior, then it could just be another inflammatory thing. It might be something that's worse than what you've just gotten rid of. So, it is kind of that has to be an element of decreasing negative behavior, which we would in from a behavior standpoint, we would call that punishment. But the motive is not necessarily to punish. It's not necessarily to make somebody feel bad about something they did. It's just to get them to stop doing it. On the other side, you
Yeah.
have to give them positive behavior that they can engage in and feel rewarded and happy about. So that's one of the things that is a little bit missing from Twitter. Is there is not a UX kind of shining example of like be like this person or do these kinds of things and you'll feel good by doing them.
That's
It's just
true.
do whatever you
Yeah.
want. There's no guidance for what the UX should feel like. It's just this like we'll just throw it up and let people do whatever they want, and it'll become whatever it is. That's exactly what happened, and it's become an extremely toxic place.
Sometimes I think about things like if you took a shift over and thought about YouTube, right? And I love YouTube. I mean, there's just so much great stuff on there.
Yeah,
I rarely read the comments, rarely,
yeah,
unless it's a product review. So, like when I'm looking at a product review, I like to read the comments because people will say stuff like, "Oh, I bought one of these 2 years ago, and I still have this problem," or whatever it is. I've actually found some value in that, but I've actually thought to myself, "What if one day YouTube was like, we don't even offer comments anymore. You can thumb up or thumb down, and that's it. Like you put your content on here, and people could say I like it or I dislike it, and that is it. Like we just got rid of comments altogether. They wouldn't even have to moderate or deal with those issues anymore."
well, you would still have to moderate the content that gets uploaded, right? Because it's uploaded by users. And sometimes
Yeah,
the biggest problem with content moderation on YouTube right now is that anybody can report anybody else for a copyright infringement. Um, and I've
yeah,
seen like
yeah,
Kevin Smith will say like, "Oh, I can't put up my own trailer I can't show my own trailer for my own movie on my YouTube channel because it gets reported and taken down, even though it's mine." This happened with was it
yeah,
Bungie, I think, or one of these gaming companies. They're posting promotional content, and then somebody was claiming that's my copyright, and it wasn't. And now that company sued both YouTube and the person who said that because they're claiming intellectual property that isn't theirs. I think YouTube has done a reasonably good
yeah.
job of kind of keeping toxicity down. You see it every now and then. I probably also don't watch a lot of the videos that end up inviting a lot of toxicity. So that's a another reason for kind of breaking things up into smaller communities because somebody who's going to watch something about a new audio interface is not necessarily the same person who's going to argue about political stuff. And it's also the topic area too,
Yeah, I
kind of.
agree. Yeah, I don't have a lot of trouble on YouTube either. And I
Yeah.
and I don't. But although I'm not like watching stuff with like a ton of gaming and stuff like that, but like for everything I do look up and everything, it always seems to be pretty good and pretty clean. You know what I mean? If
Hmm.
I go and type those same search terms into Twitter, then it's like crazy, right?
Yeah.
Or somewhere else. But yeah, I mean, different platforms maybe require different interventions. You and I work on a lot of different interventions for different companies and things. But overall, for this conversation to kind of sum up today is I think with toxicity, both increasing and intensity increasing, but also there are benefits to these engagements as well. People learn from one another and that type of stuff. It looks like it's going to be a plethora of solutions from automation to manual to incentives to what was the last one I had there? Totally forgot it. Community based. Duh. Um, yeah, I was like, I've been talking about community the whole time, and I completely forgot. But like, it's going to be some blend of all of those things together in the hopes of kind of like tampering down that type of behavior and making it a better experience for everyone. Because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
the companies that have really, really good experiences are the ones who thrive and do the best. They just do.
Yeah, it's
Um,
absolutely true.
any
And a
last
lot of
words,
these
Steve, before we wrap up?
I think one of the big things is just we need to really think about the experience that people have in social from a design standpoint on downward. I feel like a lot of these platforms were not designed with a specific type of experience necessarily in mind. or maybe it was, but it wasn't communicated all the way through the design process. And as we do that, if we think about how we can make things like Twitter that don't feel like a community start to actually feel like a community that people can own and feel attached to, then we'll start seeing less of the garbage being dumped into that yard of that community.
Absolutely. Well, with that said, I think today is a wrap of our deep dive. Thanks everyone so much for taking the time to listen. We really appreciate it. We're going to be posting the links to many of our sources that we referenced on Twitter, so you can find us and follow us at the X Podcast One. That's the X Podcast and the number one at the end. If you like this podcast, you found it interesting or informative, it helps us a great deal if you leave a review on whatever platform you use. Thanks again, and we will see you all next week.